Okay, welcome back to Small Business Chronicles. I am actually super excited today because I get to guest host for Ryan. You guys might notice my voice sounds a little bit different. My name is Brian Stone. I am really excited about guest hosting this particular podcast because I am myself a serial entrepreneur and business owner, and I love talking about business. And I'm even more excited about who I get to talk to today. So we're here to talk to doctors Todd and M.Kim Saxton, and I'm not going to go too much into the weeds because I will probably nerd out about how excited I am to chat with you guys. But first and foremost, welcome to the show. How are you? How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us, and appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I always like to start with this on my shows, and so I'll do the same thing for Ryan's show. My first question is, why should our listeners listen to you? Right? Give this is that part of the show where you can kind of put a chip on your own shoulder, and it's totally okay to tell us what makes you guys amazing at what you do.
Well, great. Thanks for asking. So first of all, we have been business school professors at one of the top universities, business schools in the country, the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. I've been there for 20 years. Todd's been there for 25 years. So we've taught a lot of students a lot of ideas. On top of that, we have co-founded a couple of startups that were high growth startups in the healthcare arena. We are also angel investors in almost 24 startups, but probably we advise and coach closer to the hundreds of startups that we've worked with, some of our alums, some people from the community, which led to us writing a book called The Titanic Effect. And it's all about the mistakes that people make in the early stages of startups and small businesses. And we recognize that, every decision has trade-offs. And so we just try to highlight what some of those trade-offs are. And if that wasn't enough, we've published multiple studies in academic journals about what leads to ventures, entrepreneurs and ventures being able to engender support for themselves and also stay in business. So,
and Brian, I'll go back a little bit further in terms of our history. That we didn't start our careers in academia. In fact, we met at a consulting firm in the Washington, D.C. area and spent 6 years as consultants working with Fortune 500 and similar international firms on competition, market positioning, acquisition, and alliance work. And that really fed our desire to come back to academia and teach, but also research around those concepts. So we rolled up our sleeves and got our hands dirty well before returning to the chalkboard at the time. And again, appreciate the opportunity to interact with your audience and maybe contribute to their decision making and some of the challenges they're facing.
Well, I'm really excited because it sounds like you guys met in business, and then it's a huge part about everything that you do, which is amazing. Is if there's one thing that I've found as a business owner and talking to a lot of other business owners and as a former coach, everybody loves talking about business. And I think the reason why is because there's always more to talk about, right? There's always more challenges. Every day brings a new challenge. And I know for me, the biggest challenge I see with young entrepreneurs or startups is there's a real monotony required in success.
Yes.
And they get addicted to the change because they're so good at thriving in it that sometimes they don't know when to stay stable and to actually launch. Is that something that you guys see with the people that you've mentored over the years? And I'm sure that's part of what's in the book too, right? Is that launching point?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just entrepreneurs. Actually, I think this is a common problem for marketers. Marketers like to do new things, and I think sometimes startup founders also just like the new stuff. And the reality is that in any business, you have to find the right path and stay the course to sort of let things gel. I mean, let's just say you want to do at the marketing, establish a certain message in the marketplace. I mean, it probably takes 3 to 10 years. And, I was with one company, a large company, that every 18 months they changed the messages completely. I was like, the last message hasn't even been successful and we're on to the next one. And I think the same thing happens with founders. I think there's some likely overlap between business founders and ADHD. And so there's like, whoa,
Yeah,
what's that?
There's definitely some truth to that, I would say.
Also, and this does come from the book and other sources as well, but there's a kind of constant juggling act that we refer to from mountain biking training, actually, about the now, the next, and the navigation of the startup. And what we see is some founders who always get, and just to clarify, the now is like, what's immediately underfoot? What are the things you're doing this hour, this day, this week? The next is what's on the immediate horizon, right? The next couple of weeks of activity, maybe the next month. But then the navigation is the ability to kind of step back and do more of that visioning. Where are we headed and are we on track? And I would say, while we see, as you're suggesting, a lot of entrepreneurs who get caught up in that navigation piece, it's always about vision and change and just let's disrupt something. There's a lot of now that has to happen, right? You've got to take your own garbage out. You've got to make that call. You've got to, figure out how to set up that website. And not all entrepreneurs are good at that. But we also see the flip side of the entrepreneurs, whether it's a side gig or a high potential venture, who just get caught up on that hamster wheel of running, and never stepping back to say, is this the life I want, my family wants, and am I actually solving the problem that I set out to fix? And that's that navigation piece. And that juggling act is hard for individuals to be in that mode on a somewhat constant basis.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, navigation is huge, and we even call in my teams in my businesses. I call our business planning GPS. It's goals, priorities, strategies, and common vernacular, right? But the reason we call it that is because it is the compass, right? It is how we know what direction we're going. And man, can business be all consuming when you're your own boss, right?
Yeah.
I joke all the time, with other people that have, the W-2 roles or that aren't in business ownership. Like, man, my boss is terrible. He never lets me off on vacation. He expects way too much out of me. He'll change directions on a whim and then expect me to be an expert in day one. So I think it's really easy to get distracted from where you need to be going. Now, next, navigation. I love that.
Yeah, the other thing I think we frequently see, and this is particularly true with small businesses, as opposed to say like high growth startups, is that they're so busy working in the business that they forget to work on the business. And that's where getting coaching and planning is really helpful. And I get it. I mean, there's so many things that have to be done every day that you get up and you're like, ding, 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 and just walking through them. But actually, that working in the business would be more efficient if you did a little bit more planning about where you ought to be and how to prioritize. And that's a hard lesson we find. We work with a lot of small businesses in our classes. That's really a hard piece for them.
Well, and I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one that has that same issues that you see universally. Because it seems like I'm one or the other. It's very hard to find that balance, right? And I know other business owners that relate to that too. You're either in the business or on the business, and it's those take different kind of energy, a different kind of energy.
They do.
So what? And I know that. Your book that you guys co-authored is a great place to see this. But what would you say are the pitfalls that are common that you see with businesses, particularly startups, that could be avoided?
Yeah. So the one I always look at from a marketing perspective is really understanding what are people buying? What are you adding value? And sometimes you're not, right? So that's the hard lesson is you've got an idea, but it's not anything that adds value to people. And so I always coach, and I'm working with a fairly large company now on the same issue, which, what job is somebody hiring you for? Yeah, you have a product offering, you have, 10 customers, thousands of customers. Do you know what they're actually hiring you for? Or are you making a lot of assumptions about that? So if you don't know what they're hiring for, you don't know what to talk to them about. You don't know why they stay. There's a lot of randomness going on there, which if you can figure out, could make you be more successful, not just with them, but with others.
So just to take a step back, Brian, on the Titanic and the metaphor, and Kim was talking about some of the what we call detbergs or icebergs that you hit in the marketing ocean. We go all out on our metaphor with a Titanic and oceans and storms and icebergs, et cetera. And we kind of position these 4 different categories or buckets, if you will, of those mistakes that people make early on. And one is the human side, so the investors, the co-founders, the early employees, things like that. One is the marketing side that Kim was talking about in terms of how you learn about the problem from the consumer's perspective or your customer's perspective. One is the technical side about how you build strategically to not overinvest in a platform or technology before you get proof of concept. And then the fourth ocean is the strategy piece, which is how you connect all of those different elements together while you're trying to launch and then scale your business. So we actually come up with 32 common mistakes that we've seen in those 4 different buckets.
Well, and we kind of speak about this a little bit before we started the show, right? I mean, a lot of times those mistakes are costly, right? Because capital is a huge part of starting any business, right? And I think some people either don't start a business because they don't have the capital they believe they need, or they start it and throw too much capital at it when they haven't had their proof of concept, right? Which I could certainly relate to. There's certainly money that I have just flushed down the drain, right? Because I overinvested on a particular system or a part of a tech stack that I thought would be perfect for my business, and it just did not perform in the way that I wanted it to, right? So, and obviously, we want to avoid those when we can see them. But talk a little bit about some of the unavoidable, right? And I know you guys mentioned this earlier. Like, how do you prepare yourself mentally, or how should our listeners, who are primarily business owners, prepare themselves mentally to hit those inevitable icebergs that are right in front, whether they see them or not?
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is understanding that all of those decisions have consequences. Whether you're making even the right decision, there are still consequences and outcomes that you might not anticipate. So spending some time stepping back to think through what that might look like. And I'd actually like to come back to that whole fundraising piece and raising capital, in that I think there's a lot of pressure from the press and media and friends, and for an entrepreneur, like, go out and raise money, go get that venture capital, where in a lot of cases, actually even raising money itself is both a huge endeavor, but also maybe not necessary. So you talked about GPS and starting with your goals. If your goal is to have a better quality of life, more time with your family, and more freedom, don't go thinking you got to go raise millions of dollars, right? Like, how far can you get without raising money? Don't fall into the trap that, if you're a successful entrepreneur, you got to talk to investors and you got to raise big dollars, because that may not actually be consistent with your motivation and what you personally are trying to get as an outcome in the first place.
Well, and what's the end goal? I mean, because we don't all live forever, right? So you're not going to be operator in your business forever. At some point, there has to be a next step or next thing. Or is that selling your business? Is that stepping outside of the operator and into the owner seat and leveraging it out, right? I think a lot of people start without having the end in mind, which makes it really hard to make those decisions along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we see the opposite. Some who start with the end in mind, which is, I want to, make millions of dollars and leave this and retire and go play in the Pacific or somewhere, And that also is not necessarily the right way to go either. That's a great way to frustrate yourself for a number of years, because those home runs are hard to do and they take a lot out of you.
Well, and I've had multiple business coaches over the year for I think I currently have 3 business coaches for 3 different aspects of my life now. One of them, who actually is going to be a guest on my coaching podcast, nice. He talks about base hits all the time. So you mentioned home run, and he's constantly trying to redirect me, because if I can just focus on those small activities, those base hits, whatever that is for your industry, right? And so for I know for a lot of sales-based industries, it's what's the top of the funnel? Really knowing what your conversions are and how many conversations you need to have. If it's marketing, it's like, do we have the right messaging and the right audience and the right platforms where they're seeing us? Do they know how to find us? Right. So I love that you mentioned the home run, because I think business owners get excited and they're stepping up to the plate, and it can be really discouraging when you kind of get beat down and you're not seeing those big wins.
Yeah. So I think another kind of area that leads to, though, is the other mistake we frequently see which is not putting fuel on the fire when you're ready. So when you do have that product market fit, you are seeing, the things are starting to work, you have to build the business, put some money to it. You have to start to spend on marketing and sales. And I think some people, it's hard for small businesses to get that money, whether that's fundraising or even bank loans, et cetera. Sometimes the money is hard to come by, but gosh, if you can figure out when you are ready to scale and be willing to hunt down the money at that moment, that's where the magic is made.
I love that. I love that too. Honestly, I budgeting is a huge thing that I focus on when I'm teaching. It's I don't think it gets equal time in the business space when people are teaching, because it's not fun. It's kind of like going to the doctor. Nobody wants to go in for an annual physical. Nobody wants to talk about their budget and their finances. But it's not just about cutting. It's also permission to spend where you need to. And I saw that this past year. With real estate being one of the larger businesses that I personally own, obviously had a lot of changes in the past 12 to 24 months, right? So budgeting became really important. But knowing that the thing we don't cut on is lead generation, right? The thing that we don't cut on is effective marketing. You got to give yourself permission to spend that money when it's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard. I think realtors, somebody might say, like, why are you, buying the shopping cart placard, whatever? Well, I mean, you just never know which is going to be the piece that does it. So you have to experiment and try some things. And experiment means spending money, and some things don't work and some things do work. And then monitoring it and knowing what is working and doing more with it. This last couple of weeks, I've talked with several groups where I'm like, well, what is your cost per lead? Oh, we've never gotten that number. I was like, well, how do you know how much to budget? This is budgeting time. You don't know how many leads you need. You don't know what your cost per leads are. How do you know how much money to spend? Those are, to me, simple questions about running a business that I think people frequently do not take time to think about.
So, Brian,
go ahead, Todd. Sorry.
I was just, you had asked before about what are some ways that the startup entrepreneur what are some things they can use or ways they can think about it that might help avoid some of these Detbergs or challenges, and thinking about everything as an experiment, thinking about every piece of marketing, every customer, every choice of product as an experiment to say, here's my hypothesis that this is what the customers want. Then how do you test that hypothesis? And that means collecting data, right? Knowing where the customer is today, what outcome are they getting from the use of your product or service or technology, and is that measurably improving their lives, right? Because that's what's going to get them to be loyal to you, to continue to use and use even more. So a lot of entrepreneurs like to talk about maybe gut feel and, this just feels right, et cetera. And we get that. We understand that urge, but try and convert that into something that is testable, as Kim was just suggesting, an experiment where you can have an idea, test it, have an outcome, and be willing to then say, okay, that didn't work. So it must be my hypothesis was wrong. What's plan B? And you're, I'm sure, familiar with the lean startup and that idea that, don't spend a lot of time in the dorm room, the library, the garage, writing a big business plan, go out there and interact. And we're big fans of that. And we definitely encourage people to get out in the market early, but don't just go and randomly pivot. We call it the pinball entrepreneur that is constantly bouncing everywhere on every piece of feedback and is never stepping back and being strategic about it with those hypotheses and science-based approach.
I mean, I love your thought process on that, Todd. I mean, taking a good science approach to it, right? Because the reality is, bad data in means bad data out, right? So, oftentimes when I'm working with a new salesperson in multiple sales industries, right? It doesn't matter the sales industry; the concepts are all the same. The first thing that is missing, that is always missing, is that they don't really track their different steps. They don't track their activities in a way that they can repeat what works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to know, okay, how many contacts to this appointment, and how many appointments that you set are actually kept. Right? Out of those kept appointments, what does that turn into as far as nurtures? Right?
Right.
Do you know your touch campaigns? Do you need 36 touches a year? Do you need 50, 56? Right? What does it look like to convert and be in line with the business goals? And so many people do not know their numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
it's disheartening for me, but it's also I can also relate to it because I don't like tracking either. Sometimes it's more fun to just get in and dial a number and have a conversation with a prospective lead, right?
yeah, but 30 years of experience in business, this is one thing I know is a truism. Any efforts you could put to improve your conversion rates are going to have the biggest payoff, right? So you can't just dump people to the top of the funnel, with a conversion rate that averages 3% down at the bottom. That's 97% are not there, right? So that's
a lot of fallout.
That's a lot of fallout. So if any step you can improve your conversion, just imagine what that would be like. I mean, we think double digit conversion is nirvana when average is 3. I mean, that's a threefold improvement.
I mean, just building on that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I was just going to say, building on that, because that gets you to kind of like competition and what are other people doing. And there are two tendencies. One is to make sure that you copy what everybody else is doing, and the other is to do everything differently. And the reality is, like, neither of those are right. Like, okay, there are table stakes, right? You've got to be reachable by your potential. If you're a realtor, you've got to have a website. There are table stakes that everybody has. And just being better at those things is not likely to be enough. You've got to have that one or two things. What's your superpower? What makes you different while you're still maintaining activity in those other areas that just everybody expects you to do well? They expect you to get back quickly by text or by phone or whatever the vehicle is, right? And know your market, those kinds of things. But then what's going to make you different, and how do you make that memorable and meaningful to your customers or potential customers?
Well, and it basically, what you're saying is that you have to have the foundation, and creativity is important, and it needs to be there to differentiate, but it can't be the entire business model, right? So, love that. Very well, very, very well put. And I can, yeah. That you mentioned, doing what everybody else does. We call it R&D, which is rip off and duplicate, right?
Right.
So
totally fine.
But I've been working with a local chef, and got a website, and it's like, is this website working for you? Well, let's look at everybody else's websites. How are they similar or different to yours? Well, they're all different in that they're a lot easier to read. So
that's my superpower. I'm really hard to interpret.
So reducing clutter should be job number one.
I don't know though. I mean, what if their mystique is they're trying to market to being all word of mouth. You know what I mean?
Or I was talking to another larger company. I said, there's nowhere like to easily register to get more information from you. And they said, oh, sure you can. Up in the upper corner, you just click the login. And since you don't have a login, then you can establish a relationship. I was like, seriously? Who is going to click the login if they're not currently a customer? Let's start there.
Well, a giant more information button goes a long way, right?
Those funnels, those basic concepts that I think a lot of people are really good at whatever it is that they do, but they're really bad at knowing how to get people in front of them, right? So that they can see what they do. So awesome. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I know that we could probably have another 3 episodes worth, but unfortunately, your time is super valuable, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of it. So before we take off, though, where can people connect with you? Give us a quick idea of where we can find your book. If people want to know more about you and what both of you do, or more about the university and the School of Business. What's the best way for them to reach out?
Sure. So the book can be found on everywhere books can be found: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Google, whatever is your favorite bookstore. Support the independence.
And we even recorded an audiobook. So if you hate our voices, that's the last place you want to go.
Right. We also have a website for the book, the titaniceffect.com. So that should pop up if you type in Titanic Effect. And then we're at Indiana University. So I'm M.K. Saxton, he's T. Saxton, and we're both at iu.edu to keep it simple.
And please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions, follow on. As you said, we were able to get a little bit of the iceberg that's above the surface and maybe dig in a little bit to what's below, but there's still a lot more out there, and we're always happy to hear from and help if we can.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time, your expertise, the conversation, and I'm sure that many of our listeners will be reaching out and looking forward to chat with you further. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.